He had everything. Yet, in that moment, he felt utterly alone. The San Francisco shoreline pulsed with music and light. Laughter mingled with waves and champagne, celebrating everything he had built. Jonathan Pierce, billionaire of empires, sat beside Victoria Hale, the perfect woman for his world. Elegant, poised, chosen, but his eyes had already betrayed him. Across the sand, Selina Carter spun freely beneath the dying sun, her joy uncontainable, her presence magnetic. She laughed with another man, unaware she was unraveling him. His grip tightened around the glass, the ice inside cracked like his facade. Victoria saw, and smiled. The kind of smile that said, "I won." But something in him snapped. He'd hidden his truth for 5 long years. Now, as Selina drifted farther into the crowd, one question echoed louder than any music. What do you think Jonathan will do next? Stay chained to his empire, or risk it all for the woman he can't forget? Don't forget to hit subscribe and share your guess in the comments before the next chapter unfolds. Selina walked the shoreline at dawn, her little sister's hand wrapped tightly in hers. The party lights were gone, replaced by soft waves brushing against the sand. She bent down, picked up a broken seashell, and pressed it into her sister's palm. "Every shell has cracks," she whispered, "but it's still beautiful." Her sister smiled, but Selina's eyes drifted far away. Flashback. A younger Selina stood in the middle of a schoolyard. Children's laughter turned sharp, cutting. "Look at her skin," one boy sneered. "Dark as dirt." Another girl giggled, pointing at her shoes, worn and torn. The sting pressed against her chest, but she lifted her chin. Even as the voices circled, she refused to bow. In that moment, she made a silent vow. "No one will define who I am. Not my color, not my class, not their cruel words." Back on the beach, she brushed the sand from her hands, her sister still smiling beside her. Selina closed her eyes, feeling the same vow burning inside. She would not break. She would not bend. But the ocean carried whispers of a future she couldn't yet see, where love and pain, wealth and prejudice would collide again. Do you believe Selina's vow will protect her, or will the world test her beyond breaking? Subscribe and share your thoughts before the next scene unfolds. Jonathan stood in his glass-walled estate, the Pacific stretching endless before him. The view was priceless, yet his heart felt caged. His phone vibrated, flashing the name he could never ignore. He answered, and his father's voice cut sharp through the line. "Don't let a girl ruin your legacy. Do you hear me, Jonathan? You carry the Pierce name. That is worth more than any fleeting desire." Jonathan stayed silent, his jaw tight. His father didn't wait for an answer. The call ended, leaving only the echo of command in the empty room. Far down the coast, the world was different. A small wooden cottage leaned into the wind, its walls thin but filled with warmth. Inside, Selina sat on the edge of a worn bed, humming softly to her little sister. Her voice carried comfort, wrapping the child in a lullaby that smoothed away every fear. She touched her sister's hair gently, whispering, "You're safe. You're loved." 2 worlds, separated by wealth, by walls, by history itself. 1 man drowning in the weight of expectation. 1 woman standing firm in the simplicity of love. The morning tide left scattered shells along the sand, each one chipped by the ocean's weight. Selina bent down, choosing carefully. She found a small shell with soft pink edges and a crack that ran through its center. She turned it over in her hand, then placed it into her sister's palm. Her little sister frowned at the broken line, but Selina closed her fingers around it. "Listen," she said gently. "Even when the waves wash everything away, we can draw it again. No one can take your dreams unless you give them up." The child looked up, uncertain, then slowly smiled. She pressed the shell to her chest as if it held power. Selina's eyes lingered on her, and behind them lived her own scars. Years of being told she was less. Years of being reminded she did not belong. But like the shell, she was still whole. The ocean stretched before them, vast and unending. Selina breathed in the salt air, steady and unshaken. The shell had become more than a gift. It was a promise. That hope, like the tide, always returned. The midday sun cast a golden glare across the beach, where white tents rose like crowns above the sand. At the center, a long table overflowed with crystal glasses and silver platters. Jonathan sat at the head, Victoria at his side, her laughter cutting through the hum of conversation. He nodded politely to those around him, though his expression stayed distant. Not far away, Selina moved quietly between the guests, balancing a tray of tea with her friends. Her dress was plain, her steps careful, yet there was grace in the way she carried herself. She did not belong to their world, but she did not shrink from it either. For a moment, his eyes found hers. The noise of the party dulled. She froze, tray trembling slightly in her hands. In that look lived both longing and a wall neither could cross. Then Victoria leaned close, her hand resting on Jonathan's arm. The connection snapped, leaving only distance. Yet the echo of that silent glance stayed burning in them both. Jonathan's gaze lingered across the tables, past the polished silver and the chatter of investors, until it found Selina again. She stood in the distance, offering tea to an older couple. The tray was steady in her hands now, her eyes calm, though he could sense the weight behind them. For a brief moment the air between them felt charged. His chest tightened, torn between duty and desire. He wanted to rise, to cross the sand and break the silence of years. But before the thought could form, Victoria slipped her arm through his. She leaned close, her perfume sharp, her voice soft but edged with steel. "She belongs to the dust and salt of this beach," Victoria murmured. "Not to diamonds, not to you." Jonathan did not answer. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed thin. Only his eyes betrayed the storm inside, wanting, aching, yet locked behind walls he was too afraid to tear down. Selina glanced up once more, catching his look. For her, it was enough to know the conflict lived there. For him, it was a wound he could not admit aloud. The tide had begun to rise, sweeping over the smooth sand and erasing the lines left from the morning. Selina walked slowly with her little sister, their bare feet leaving fresh prints along the shore. Each step disappeared almost as soon as it was made, washed away by the restless water. Her sister frowned, pointing back at the empty stretch. "Why does the ocean take them away?" Selina knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from the child's face. She placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Every wave tries to erase what we leave behind," she said softly. "But if we walk strong enough, if we stand firm, some marks will stay. They'll last longer than the tide." The girl studied her own small footprints, then pressed her heel deeper into the sand as if to test her sister's words. She smiled, the worry gone from her eyes. Selina rose, looking out at the horizon. She wasn't only speaking to a child. She was speaking to herself, to the years of whispers and cruelty she had endured. Each word was a quiet vow, that her life, her love, her dignity would not be washed away. Selina brushed sand from her hands and lifted her sister into a playful spin. The little girl laughed, her voice carrying above the surf. For a moment, everything felt untouched by judgment, just two souls held safe by the sound of the sea. But, not far down the beach, another presence watched. Monica Blake stood beneath the shade of a striped canopy, a glass of wine balanced effortlessly in her hand. She had once walked beside Selina through years of friendship, through secrets and promises whispered in the dark. Now her eyes traced Selina with something colder. There was no warmth in her smile. It was curved too sharply, lingering too long, a mask hiding something unspoken. As Selina leaned down to tuck a shell into her sister's pocket, Monica's gaze narrowed. The crowd moved around her, yet she seemed fixed in place, calculating. She raised the glass to her lips, the hidden smile never leaving. It was not the smile of a friend. It was the foreshadow of betrayal, quiet and patient, waiting for its moment. The laughter at the long table carried like shallow music, crystal glasses clinking against polished silver. Jonathan sat beside Victoria, his phone buzzing against the linen cloth. He glanced down. A message lit the screen in bold clarity. "Legacy above all. Do not forget who you are." His chest tightened. He slipped the phone face down, but the words burned into him. Victoria leaned closer, mistaking his silence for agreement. "They're right," she whispered. "Reputation is everything." Jonathan's jaw flexed, though he said nothing. Far from the noise of chandeliers and wine, Selina crouched at the edge of the tide. She found a small shell and pressed it gently into her sister's hand. The child clutched it with delight, as if she had been given treasure. Selina pulled her close, her voice low but steady. "Remember this. You have the right to live. You have the right to be loved." Her sister nodded, eyes wide with trust. Two worlds unfolded at once, one defined by pressure and inheritance, the other by resilience and hope. Neither knew how soon they would collide, shattering both silence and safety. The evening drew in slowly, streaks of orange fading into the restless blue of the Pacific. Guests began to drift from the tables, their chatter softening into the distance. Jonathan remained behind, his figure outlined by the glow of lanterns that flickered against the darkening tide. He walked away from the laughter, away from Victoria's constant presence, until the sound of the waves was louder than the voices. Standing at the edge of the terrace, he fixed his gaze on the horizon. The ocean stretched limitless before him, untamed and free. His reflection wavered in the glass railing, sharp suit and measured stance, the image of a man who had everything. Wealth, respect, power. The empire he had built stood as proof of victory, and yet, as the wind rushed against him, a truth pressed heavier than all his gains. Jonathan's lips parted in a whisper meant for no one but himself. I have everything. Yet I don't dare reach for the one thing I truly want. The words vanished into the night, swallowed by the tide, but the ache remained, gnawing in silence, daring him to choose between the life he owned and the life he longed for. The afternoon sun glared off the polished tables, catching the sparkle of diamonds and pearls. A cluster of women in silk dresses gathered near the drink stand, their voices low but sharp enough to cut. Selina passed by with a tray, her steps even, her expression calm. One of the women tilted her glass, eyes narrowing. "A girl like her doesn't belong at a place like this," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Another leaned in, lips curling. She should know her place. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Laughter followed, brittle and rehearsed. Selina paused, her fingers tightening around the tray. The weight of their stares pressed against her, demanding silence. Instead, she lifted her head. Her voice carried steady, clear over the surf and chatter. "I was born with this skin. It is mine, and I will never hide it. I have the right to live anywhere, the right to stand anywhere." The circle of women stiffened, whispers rippling between them. For the first time, their laughter faltered. Selina moved on, her stride firm against the tide of scorn. The air shifted after Selina's words, as if the tide itself had paused to listen. For a heartbeat, the clinking of glasses and low music faded. Then came the murmurs. Quiet at first, then building like a restless wave. Guests leaned toward one another, eyes cutting in Selina's direction. Some looked startled, others disapproving, their whispers carrying judgment. Fingers pointed subtly, faces turned away with practiced disdain. She felt the weight of their gaze pressing harder than the sun overhead. Jonathan's hand tightened around his glass from across the table, but he stayed motionless. At the edge of the gathering, Victoria stood apart, her silk dress catching the light. She watched every ripple of tension with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her voice slipped out like a blade, soft enough to be missed by most but sharp enough for those near her to catch. "Pulling her down will be simple," she murmured. Her words hung in the air, poisonous yet controlled, planting the seed of a storm waiting to break. Selina, though steady on her feet, could feel the crowd turning, every whisper another crack in the fragile silence surrounding her. The whispers had begun to swell, restless like wind before a storm. Selina kept moving through the crowd, holding her tray steady, but every step carried the weight of eyes that would not look away. From the corner, Monica Blake leaned in close to a pair of women dressed in silk. Her tone was hushed, but her words were sharpened to cut. "She's clinging to Jonathan Pierce," Monica said smoothly. "Don't be fooled. She's after his money, his name. She'll do anything to change her life." One woman gasped softly, another raised her brows, curiosity sparking into suspicion. Monica's lips curved, satisfied. She drifted toward another cluster, repeating the same poison with slight variations, letting it settle into eager ears. Soon, the tide of talk shifted. Strangers exchanged knowing glances, a laugh here, a shake of the head there, as if they all understood some hidden truth. Selina felt it before she heard it. The air thickened, the space around her tightening with unspoken judgment. She lifted her chin, but her chest burned. She didn't yet know the source. She only knew the room was turning, and the story was no longer hers to tell. The laughter and chatter around her blurred into a dull roar, voices carrying whispers that struck harder than shouts. Selina felt them closing in, eyes narrowing, smiles twisting into pity, judgment dressed as curiosity. Her throat tightened. She bit her lower lip until the sting replaced the ache building inside. The tray in her hands grew heavier, though it held almost nothing. She lowered it onto a table and turned away before anyone could see the tremble in her fingers. The sand met her steps as she walked down the beach, away from the music, away from the echo of cruel speculation. Each footprint she left behind wavered, uneven, pressed by the weight she carried alone. Her eyes glistened, but no tear fell. The pain demanded a voice, but she swallowed it back, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of her weakness. She walked further, the surf brushing close to her feet. Only the trembling of her steps betrayed the storm inside. On the surface, silence. Beneath it, a hurt that threatened to break her if she let it rise. Jonathan saw her retreat, the hem of her dress brushing against the sand, her shoulders heavy with a silence that screamed louder than words. His hand tightened around his glass until it threatened to shatter. Every instinct told him to rise, to walk after her, to stand in front of the sneers and give her the shield she deserved. But he didn't move. A gentle but firm hand slid over his own. Victoria. She leaned close, her smile flawless, her whisper sharper than glass. Don't lower yourself for her. You're a Pierce. Men like you don't chase shadows. His chest burned, the conflict tearing at him. The man the world expected sat frozen in his chair. The man inside wanted to run across the sand. He stayed caught between them, lips pressed tight, eyes locked on the waves where Selina disappeared. The crowd saw nothing. Only he knew the war behind his stillness. If you were Jonathan, bound by family, wealth, and legacy, would you stay seated, or would you rise for love, no matter the cost? Selina walked farther down the shoreline, her pace unsteady but determined. The sand held her weight for only a moment, each step leaving behind a fragile trace of her presence. She slowed, staring at the uneven trail behind her, as if those marks were proof she had endured the night. Then the ocean rose. A sudden swell surged forward, foam curling high before crashing hard against the beach. The water spread wide, sweeping over the prints one by one. By the time it pulled back, the sand was smooth, untouched, as though she had never walked there at all. Selina stood still, her chest tightening. The world seemed to say she could be erased just as easily, her voice drowned, her fight ignored. She bent down, pressing her hand into the wet ground, leaving behind one clear imprint deeper than the rest. The waves reached again, but this time the mark held. Selina's breath steadied. She whispered to herself, almost defiant, "I'm still here." Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where the fading sun painted the water in fire. The world might try to wash her away, but she would carve her place deeper than the tide could touch. Selina slowed her steps, pausing near the edge of the crowd. She hadn't meant to look back, but something inside her pulled her eyes toward the glowing tables once more. And there he was, Jonathan, still seated, his gaze following her like an echo he could not silence. For a heartbeat, it was only them, his expression raw, torn open, almost reaching for her without moving at all. Then Victoria leaned in. She shifted gracefully, her hand on his shoulder, her face close enough to block out everything else. With deliberate slowness, she pressed her lips to his. Her posture made it clear. This was no moment of love, only a claim, a performance meant for every set of watching eyes, including Selina's. The sight struck like a blade. Selina turned quickly, but not fast enough to stop the tear that slid down her cheek. She pressed her hand to her face, swallowing the cry that threatened to break. The waves roared behind her as if mocking her silence. Each step away from them both felt heavier than the last, as though she was walking against the pull of an ocean determined to drag her back. The clatter of glasses and the shimmer of laughter filled the night, but Selina's steps carried her past the edge of the party. She lingered near the fringe, close enough to hear but far enough to remain unseen. A woman in pearls raised her glass, her tone casual yet dripping with superiority. "Money buys everything," she declared, her companions nodding in agreement. "Even love. Especially love." The group chuckled, pleased with their own cynicism. The words sank deep into Selina, colder than the ocean breeze. For years she had watched doors close, had seen the wealthy treat affection like another possession, something to display and discard. She closed her eyes, holding her breath as if the silence could shield her. But the truth clawed its way out, soft and trembling, a whisper meant for no one yet sharp enough to pierce the night. "No," she murmured, "only love can buy a real heart." The words dissolved into the wind, unheard by the ones who mocked her, yet speaking them steadied her chest. For a fleeting moment she clung to the belief that love, true, unbought, was still worth fighting for. The rumor spread like fire caught in dry grass. It began as a whisper, shared between two curious mouths. By the time it reached the far end of the beach, it had grown claws. Gold digger. The words passed from table to table, reshaped with each retelling, until it no longer sounded like gossip, but like fact. Selina felt it before she fully heard it. The shift in the air, the way laughter dimmed when she walked past, how conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed her, no longer curious, but sharp with judgment. One woman looked her up and down, lips curling. A man smirked, shaking his head as though the story confirmed what he had always believed. Step by step, every glance cut deeper. It was like moving through slow motion, faces turning, expressions hardening, 1,000 unspoken accusations hanging between them. Selina pressed her arms tight to her sides, fighting the urge to run. Each step forward felt heavier, her chest rising and falling too quickly. She didn't need to ask what they were saying. The contempt in their eyes spoke louder than words ever could. Selina slowed near a cluster of guests, her heart already raw from the tide of whispers. She meant to pass quietly, to slip away before another cruel glance could reach her. Then she heard it, a voice she knew too well. Monica leaned close to a man in a tailored suit, her words low but sharpened to strike. "I won't let her walk over me again," she hissed. "Not this time. Not ever." The sound lodged in Selina's chest. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Memories flickered, shared laughter, whispered secrets, the warmth of a friend she once trusted more than anyone. Now those same lips twisted with venom. Selina froze, her hands cold, her pulse roaring in her ears. She wanted to step forward, to ask why, but her feet would not move. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It stood before her, clear, undeniable. Her body felt weightless, as if the ground itself had given way. And in that silence, broken trust cut deeper than any insult the crowd had thrown her way. Jonathan had watched long enough. Selina's silence, her quiet dignity against a storm of whispers, burned through him. He pushed back his chair, his body rising before his mind had fully decided. His chest swelled with the words he wanted to unleash. Words that would cut through the venom, words that would finally claim her in front of them all. But the vibration in his pocket stopped him. The screen lit with a name he could never ignore. His father. He lifted the phone, pressing it to his ear, still staring at the shoreline where Selina had disappeared into shadows. The voice came cold, commanding, without a pause for breath. "If you choose her, we cut you off. All of it. Money, power, the Pierce name, everything." Jonathan's hand shook, the phone slick with sweat. His throat locked, the words trapped. He wanted to scream back, to defy him, to say that love mattered more, but he stayed silent. His jaw clenched, eyes burning with rage he couldn't release. The ocean roared, as if mocking the cage he'd built around himself. For now, his silence was his prison. The party lights faded behind her until only the dark stretch of ocean remained. Selina sank to the sand, pulling her knees close, her body folding into itself as if to shield from a storm that never stopped. Her tears slipped freely now, tracing lines down her cheeks before falling to the ground. The grains of sand clung to her skin, tiny reminders that even the earth would not let her break cleanly. She pressed her forehead against her knees, her chest heaving with the weight of everything. Betrayal, humiliation, loneliness so sharp it hurt to breathe. For a moment, she wished the waves would rise high enough to wash her away. Then, a soft hand touched her shoulder. She lifted her head just enough to see her little sister, small arms wrapping around her with a fierceness beyond her size. "Don't give up, sis," the girl whispered, her voice trembling but sure. Selina closed her eyes, clutching the child against her. The world had tried to strip her bare, but here, in the warmth of her sister's embrace, she found a thread of strength she thought she had lost. Jonathan's chest ached as he spotted Selina further down the shore, folded into the arms of her little sister. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to close the distance, to fall at her feet and beg for forgiveness. His steps began, slow but certain, sand giving way beneath each stride. Then a hand caught his arm. Victoria's grip was tight, nails pressing into his sleeve like claws. Her voice cut low, sharp enough to pierce through the crash of waves. "If you go to her, you lose everything. Money, family, the life you've built. All of it, gone for her." Jonathan froze. His jaw tensed, eyes still locked on Selina, who had just lifted her face to the wind, fragile but glowing with resilience. One more step, and she might have seen him. One more breath, and he could have reached her. But he stayed still, bound by fear, by loyalty to a world that had chained him since birth. Selina turned at last, searching the shoreline. Her gaze passed over him without pause, as if he wasn't there. Then she turned her back, walking into the darkness, leaving him stranded in his silence. The last trace of daylight stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in fading gold and violet. Selina walked slowly along the shoreline, each step illuminated by the dying glow. Her figure was fragile but steady, her dress catching the soft light as if the sun itself refused to let her vanish. Behind her, the world grew darker. Jonathan sat alone at the edge of the party, the lanterns dim, shadows swallowing him whole. His hands hung useless at his sides, his body heavy as if weighed down by every choice he hadn't made. His eyes burned red, not from the salt air but from a grief he could no longer contain. Selina moved further from the music, further from the whispers, her path lit by what little light remained. Jonathan stayed behind in silence, a man with everything yet nothing, unable to follow. Two figures divided by light and darkness, one pressing forward, carrying hope in her tears, the other trapped in shadow, drowning in regret. The ocean rolled between them, endless, merciless, as if to remind him this was the cost of his silence. Selina stopped where the waves touched her toes, the chill of the water biting into her skin. She lifted her head to the horizon, where the last fire of the sunset melted into the sea. The light shimmered across her tear-streaked face, catching in her eyes like fragile stars. Her breath trembled as she whispered into the wind, not for anyone else to hear, but herself alone. "Do I live bowed, or live proud?" The words broke against her lips, carried away with the salt of the tide. Her body ached from the weight of judgment, from betrayal, from being seen as less than human. Yet, in that moment, she felt a spark still alive, burning beneath the ache. She touched the seashell still in her pocket, the one she had promised her sister would never lose its meaning. The waves surged forward, as if daring her to step in, to choose her path. Her face tilted toward the fading sun, tears glistening against the glow. A woman on the edge of breaking, or becoming. The screen of her life seemed to pause here, suspended, her choice looming like the night sky above. The horizon burned red, as if the sky itself had caught fire. Selina stood at the water's edge, the wind tearing through her hair, the salt clinging to her lips. The world behind her, its whispers, its cruelty, faded into nothing but distant noise. The waves roared, pulling and crashing with a power that matched the storm inside her chest. She closed her eyes, letting the air rush against her face, her arms trembling but unyielding. Her voice came out low, barely louder than a breath. "I've endured enough." The words weren't shouted, but they cut deeper than any scream. They belonged to no one but her, a vow spoken to the sea, to the sky, to herself. In that silence, with the sun bleeding into the ocean, Selina felt something shift. Pain was still there, sharp as ever, but beneath it rose something stronger. Resolve. She inhaled deeply, the scent of salt and smoke filling her lungs, as if the whole world demanded she finally stand tall. For the first time, she wasn't asking whether she could survive. She was declaring she would. Her vow still lingered in the air when the sound of hurried footsteps broke through the crash of the tide. Sand scattered under heavy shoes, uneven, desperate. Then a voice cut through the wind, raw and breathless. "Selina!" She froze. Her heart slammed in her chest, her body stiff as though the ocean itself had swallowed her breath. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she turned. There he was, Jonathan, running toward her, his suit undone, hair wind-blown, face flushed with something more than exhaustion. His chest heaved with each ragged breath, but his eyes carried a weight she had longed to see, feared to see, for years. Selina's tears blurred her vision, spilling freely, her resolve colliding with a flood of old longing. Her throat tightened, caught between anger and the ache of a love she could never fully bury. The setting sun framed them in fire and shadow, two figures on the edge of a truth they could no longer outrun. Her lips parted, trembling, but no words came. She only stared, eyes glistening, as the man she thought had abandoned her finally stood within reach. Jonathan stopped just a few feet away, his chest still rising and falling, his voice raw, as if every word tore its way out. "I hid my love for 5 years," he said, his eyes locked on hers, refusing to look away. "I buried it under money, under titles, under the weight of fear. I thought if I ignored it, it would die. But it never did." Selina's breath caught. She wanted to step back, to guard herself, but her feet rooted in the sand. Jonathan's voice cracked, softer now, trembling. "I let the world tell me what mattered. Wealth, reputation, power. But without you, all of it is hollow, empty, like glass with nothing inside. The wind whipped between them, carrying the confession into the open air, impossible to take back. For a moment, the waves seemed to quiet, as if the ocean itself was listening. Selina's tears slid down her cheeks. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Inside her, hurt battled against hope, the memory of betrayal colliding with the echo of the man she once believed in. The distance between them was small, yet it felt like an ocean. Jonathan's shoes sank into the wet sand as the tide crept closer, but he didn't move. Instead, he dropped to one knee, the salt water soaking through his suit without hesitation. His voice shook, not from weakness, but from truth too long silenced. "I choose you," he said, each word carrying the weight of years lost. His hand pressed against the sand, steadying him as waves crashed around his legs. Not the money, not the legacy, not the hollow applause of people who will never know me. I choose you, Selina. She stared at him, her hands trembling at her sides. The sight of a man who had everything kneeling before her was almost too much to take in. Jonathan's gaze never faltered. "If I lose it all tomorrow, it won't matter, because none of it has ever made me feel alive the way you do." The ocean surged, foaming white against his knees, as if sealing his vow. Selina's tears mixed with the sea air, her chest tight with the collision of disbelief and longing. For the first time she saw not the billionaire the world admired, but a man stripped bare, choosing love above all. For a heartbeat, Selina stood frozen, her breath shallow, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything unsaid. Then the dam inside her broke. Tears poured freely, hot and unrelenting, spilling faster than she could stop them. A sob ripped through her, raw and unguarded. She stepped forward, stumbling into Jonathan's arms as if gravity itself had pulled her there. His embrace closed around her instantly, firm and trembling at once, holding her as if he would never let go again. Her face pressed against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The only sound was her crying, echoing against the rhythm of the waves. Behind them, the ocean roared, a wave crashing so hard it sprayed white foam into the air. The horizon glowed with the blaze of a dying sun, streaks of red and gold spilling across the sky like a benediction. For the first time in years, Selina allowed herself to collapse into the very place she had always feared, his arms. And, for the first time, Jonathan held her not as a possession, not as a secret, but as the only truth he could no longer deny. Her tears soaked through his shirt, warm against the cool evening air. Selina clung to him as if afraid he would vanish if she let go. Her voice broke between sobs, a whisper cracked by years of silence. "You came too late," she said, her words trembling against his chest. Then softer, barely audible, "But I still need you." Jonathan's throat tightened, his body shaking with the weight of her pain. He lowered his forehead to hers, his breath uneven. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words tasting of regret. "For every night I let fear win, for every time I let them silence me." His voice quivered, but his eyes burned with resolve. He pulled her closer, the ocean roaring behind them, as if daring to test his promise. "From this moment on, nothing, no money, no family, no whispers, will ever come between us again." Selina closed her eyes, breathing him in, torn between anger for the years lost and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time he meant it. The world around them blurred into salt, sea, and fading sun, leaving only two hearts tangled together, trembling but unbroken. From the edge of the crowd, Victoria's heels sank into the sand as she stormed forward. Her eyes burned, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ocean wind. "Jonathan!" she spat. "You're throwing everything away. Your legacy, your name, your power, for her?" Selina stiffened, but Jonathan didn't let go of her hand. He turned slowly, his gaze steady, his voice calm yet unyielding. "Power without love is empty. Fame without truth means nothing." His words carried like the tide, undeniable, unstoppable. Victoria's face flushed, her practiced poise cracking under the weight of rejection. For the first time she had no script, no smirk to hide behind. Just silence and humiliation. The crowd shifted, some eyes darting away, others fixed on her downfall. Selina's fingers tightened around Jonathan's, not in triumph, but in disbelief. For once, someone chose her openly, without apology. The waves pounded harder, as if sealing Jonathan's defiance. Victoria stood frozen, her image of control slipping into the shadows. And here's where I'll leave you hanging. What happens when someone like Victoria, wounded, humiliated, but still powerful, decides she won't walk away quietly. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what would you do in her place? The shoreline was no longer theirs alone. Eyes lingered, drawn by the crack in Jonathan's polished armor, by the woman at his side who wasn't meant to belong in his world. Some onlookers stood still, caught between awe and disbelief. A young couple exchanged a glance, one whispering, "Maybe love really can't be bought." An older man shook his head, muttering that Jonathan was a fool throwing his empire to the tide. Closer by, a group of women hid behind champagne glasses, their whispers sharp, designed to sting. "She'll ruin him," one hissed. "Just wait." Their words floated on the breeze, heavy enough to wound though never said to Selina's face. But among the crowd, a quiet ripple of empathy grew. A middle-aged woman pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes wet, as if she saw a piece of her own story unfolding in front of her. The air thickened with judgment and silent prayers. Every murmur, every gasp, every hidden tear made it clear. This was no longer a private choice. Jonathan and Selina's love was stepping out of the shadows, watched, dissected, and exposed under the fading light of the San Francisco sky. Jonathan's hand tightened around Selina's, his grip fierce, unshakable. He turned toward the restless crowd, his voice rising above the crash of the waves. "This is the woman I love," he shouted, chest heaving, eyes burning with conviction. "And I will not hide it, not from my family, not from any of you, not from the world." The wind ripped his words across the sand, carrying them into every corner of silence. For a moment, the murmurs stopped. Even the tide seemed to pause, as if waiting for the weight of his defiance to settle. Selina's breath caught. Her heart pounded so loudly it matched the rhythm of the sea. She had never seen Jonathan so bare, stripped of the shield's money and power had always given him. A wave crashed hard behind them, exploding into spray. Its roar blended with the hammering in their chests. An anthem of risk, of rebellion, of a love daring to exist against every rule written to erase it. Selina's eyes brimmed with tears, not of pain this time, but of something that felt dangerously close to freedom. Jonathan didn't hesitate. With the waves surging and the crowd holding its breath, he pulled Selina into him and pressed his lips to hers. The world fell away. The music from the party faded, the whispers silenced. All that remained was the heat of his mouth against hers, the taste of salt from the ocean mixing with her tears. Around them, the sky bled into fire, streaks of orange and red stretching across the horizon, as if the sun itself was blessing what no one else dared to. A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, echoing against the water. Selina's body trembled as she leaned into him. Her eyes closed, surrendering to the moment she had dreamed of, but never believed would come. A single tear slipped free, sliding down her cheek, falling onto his lips like a vow sealed in silence. Jonathan kissed her deeper, his hand cradling her face, grounding her against the storm. For once, he wasn't the billionaire or the son of power. He was just a man choosing the woman who made him alive. The waves roared, the crowd stirred, but they didn't move. They only held on. The kiss broke, but the moment held. Selina's breath trembled against his chest, her hand clutching his shirt as if afraid he would disappear again. Jonathan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the screen lit up with his father's words. "If you go public, the family will cut you off. Everything." The threat was sharp, cold, like ice against his skin. For a heartbeat, his jaw clenched, the weight of legacy pressing down. All the wealth, the power, the empire, dangling above him like a blade. Selina shifted, her eyes searching his. She didn't know what the message said, but she could read the hesitation on his face. For her, it was the moment that would decide everything, whether she was worth standing beside or just another shadow he'd abandon. Jonathan exhaled, slow and steady. Then, without a word, he erased the message, the glow of the screen vanishing into the night. He reached for her hand, gripping it tighter than before, his knuckles pale with conviction. No speeches, no promises, just the silence of choice. A man who had lived by fear was for the first time daring to defy it. Selina's fingers intertwined with his, and for that moment, she believed him. The night deepened, and the last streaks of sunset faded into a velvet sky. The moon rose, casting its silver path across the restless ocean. The tide shimmered under the pale light, each wave carrying the sound of something eternal. Jonathan and Selina stood side by side, their hands still bound together. She tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the moon's glow, uncertain if this fragile moment could truly last. Jonathan turned toward her, his voice steady but low, carried by the hush of the waves. "From this night forward," he said, "I'll be your shoulder, not only in love, but in life." The words weren't grand, but they were heavier than any promise he'd ever made. They weren't meant for a crowd or an audience, just for her. Selina blinked, her lashes wet, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean against him, resting her weight on the man who had always stood at a distance. The moonlight wrapped around them like a quiet vow. Here, beneath its silver witness, Jonathan chose not only to love her, but to stay. The ocean air grew colder, brushing against Selina's skin as she pulled back just enough to meet Jonathan's eyes. The moonlight traced the sharp lines of his face, but what she searched for wasn't strength. It was truth. Her voice carried the weight of every doubt she had swallowed. "Will you face them?" she asked softly. "Your family, the press, the world that worships your name, will you stand even when they strip you of everything?" The question hung heavy, like a final test. Jonathan drew a slow breath, his chest tight with the memory of years wasted in silence. 5 years of hiding behind money, behind fear, behind the shadow of his father's voice. His hand closed tighter around hers, grounding himself. His eyes no longer wavered. "I was a coward for 5 years," he said, his words raw, unshaken. "I won't live that way again." The wind carried his vow out over the dark water, where the waves crashed like thunder. Selina's heart pressed hard against her ribs. For the first time she believed he meant it, not as a declaration of love, but as a declaration of who he had finally chosen to be. The night had softened, leaving only the hush of the waves and the pale shimmer of moonlight scattered across the sand. Jonathan and Selina walked side by side, fingers interlaced, their footsteps pressing into the damp shore. For the first time their path felt open, lit by the quiet glow of something they had both fought to claim. Selina's head leaned gently against his shoulder, and Jonathan's grip around her hand was steady, no longer shaken by fear. Every step forward felt like defiance, like a choice remade with each heartbeat. But not far behind, the light faded into shadow. Standing apart from the laughter and the music, Victoria's figure was rigid, her jaw tight with fury she refused to show. Beside her, Monica's smile curved faintly, but her eyes betrayed the sharpness of intent. The two women lingered in the darkness, their gazes locked on the couple framed by silver light. Their silence carried a weight more dangerous than words. Jonathan and Selina walked on, unaware that every step into the moonlight only deepened the resolve of those who waited in the shadows. Love had found its voice, but opposition had not yet spoken its last word. The night seemed to breathe with them, every wave rising and falling in rhythm to their steps. Then, faintly at first, as if born from the ocean itself, came the sound of music, soft piano notes, delicate and aching. The melody curled through the air, carrying a sadness too deep for words. Each key pressed was like a whisper of the battles they had already endured, and the ones still waiting in the distance. Selina's breath slowed, her heart sinking with the fragile tune, as though the music were telling her story back to her. Jonathan tightened his hold on her hand. With each rising chord, the piano swelled, growing stronger, no longer just sorrow, but resolve. It was the sound of choice, of defiance, of a love that refused to drown under the weight of expectation. Selina closed her eyes, letting the notes wash over her, letting the rhythm carve courage into her bones. The melody lingered, bittersweet yet unyielding. It wasn't the end of the storm, it was only the overture, a promise that the path ahead would be harder, crueler, but also theirs to walk together. The quiet magic of their moment cracked when the sound of voices rose behind them. At first it was a murmur, then louder, people whispering, pointing, lifting their phones. The flash of cameras cut through the silver night, capturing the forbidden embrace now etched in the eyes of strangers. Selina stiffened. Her breath quickened. Her fingers trembled inside Jonathan's grip. She had grown used to judgment, but never under such a spotlight, never with this many eyes pressing down on her like 1,000 invisible weights. Snatches of words carried on the wind. He's lost his mind. She's playing him. This will ruin everything. Her chest tightened, panic threatening to pull her under. She tried to step back to shield herself from the storm of stares, but Jonathan caught her hand and refused to let go. "Look at me," he said firmly, his voice steady against the chaos. When her eyes met his, he didn't flinch. "We will get through this, together. For a moment the noise faded. The crowd still watched, the cameras still clicked, but inside Jonathan's grip, Selina felt something stronger than fear. She felt chosen. She felt seen. The whispers of the crowd still clung to the air, but Selina's focus had narrowed to one face. Monica stood apart, a glass in her hand, her smile sharp as broken glass. Selina's steps were slow but certain as she crossed the sand. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the sting of betrayal. "Why?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the woman who once knew her secrets. "Why would you do this to me?" Monica tilted her head, the smirk never leaving her lips. Her laugh was low, bitter, a sound dripping with old resentment. "Because I couldn't stand it anymore," she said. "You always shined, Selina. No matter where we were, people looked at you, and me. I was invisible." Selina's throat tightened. The wound cut deeper because it came from someone she had once called sister, someone who knew her struggles and still chose to twist the knife. "You think tearing me down will make you brighter?" Selina whispered. Monica's eyes flickered, but the cruelty stayed. "It'll make the world see you for what you really are." The air grew heavier. Betrayal had a face now, and it was one Selina once trusted. Selina's breath came in sharp bursts, her chest rising and falling as if the betrayal itself had stolen the air from her lungs. Her voice cracked when it finally escaped. "I treated you like family," she said, her words breaking under the weight of memory. "I called you my sister." Her tears blurred the lights of the beach, but the pain was clear, etched in every syllable. For years she had shared dreams, laughter, and secrets with Monica, never imagining those hands would be the ones to push her down. Monica's eyes flickered, some shadow of guilt passing too quickly to catch. But instead of speaking, she turned her face away, her silence louder than any confession. Selina's tears streamed freely now, each drop carrying the sting of a friendship that had died long before she realized it. Her voice lowered, almost to a whisper, raw and unguarded. "You were the one person I thought I'd never lose." But Monica's back was already turned, her silence sealing the truth. The bond they once shared had been severed, not by distance or time, but by choice. In that moment, Selina understood. Betrayal wasn't just an act. It was a door closing forever. Jonathan's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a family video call. He hesitated, but answered. One by one, familiar faces filled the frame, his mother, his siblings, and at the center, his father, rigid as stone. The room behind them was lavish, chandeliers glinting, but the warmth of family was absent. Every gaze was cold, measuring. His father leaned forward, voice cutting through the distance like a blade. "If you choose her, Jonathan, we cut you off. No money, no legacy, no seat at this table. Everything you've built with our name will vanish." Jonathan's throat tightened. His mother's lips trembled, but she stayed silent. His siblings shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak against the patriarch. For a moment, Jonathan saw his life flash before him. Boardrooms, headlines, his empire, all tied to the family name. And then, Selina's face rose in his mind, the only truth he couldn't deny. His father's words echoed again, colder this time. "Choose wisely. Blood or ruin." Jonathan stared at the screen, torn between the empire that raised him and the love that freed him. The silence stretched, a test heavier than any fortune. The wind whipped around him as Jonathan held the phone, his father's warning still echoing. Behind the screen was everything he had ever been told to protect. Wealth, power, a dynasty built on control. But just a few steps away stood Selina, her eyes red from tears, her strength unshaken despite the cruelty she endured. She wasn't asking for his fortune, she only wanted his truth. Jonathan's gaze drifted from her to the endless horizon. The ocean roared, wild and unbound, like the choice before him. His voice broke the silence, steady but raw. "I don't need everything," he said, his eyes never leaving Selina, "if having it means losing her." For a second, no one moved. His father's face hardened, his siblings froze, and then Jonathan did the unthinkable. He ended the call. The screen went black. On the other side, his family sat in stunned silence, their empire momentarily powerless against one man's choice. Jonathan lowered the phone, his hand trembling, but his chest lighter than it had been in years. The decision was made. He had traded a crown for a heartbeat. The beach had split in two. Some clapped softly, moved by Jonathan's defiance. Others muttered in anger, shaking their heads, their voices sharp with disapproval. The air felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. In the midst of the whispers, an elderly black woman stepped forward. Her steps were slow but firm, her presence commanding respect. She reached for Selina's hand, her palm warm, her grip steady. "Daughter," she said softly, her voice carrying above the noise, "stand tall. I dreamed of this day, when one of us would be loved openly, not in shadows." Selina's eyes welled, her lips trembling. The woman's words wrapped around her like a shield, stronger than any applause or any jeer. Behind them the crowd murmured louder, lines drawn, sides chosen. Jonathan tightened his hold on Selina's other hand, bracing for the battle ahead. But for that moment, the world seemed to slow. A stranger's blessing had given Selina what Jonathan's empire never could: validation. "Do you think this old woman's voice is the spark that could turn the crowd in their favor? Or will the storm only grow stronger?" A single tear slid down Selina's cheek, catching the faint glow of the rising moon before falling to the sand. Her chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, her body trembling under the weight of every stare pressing against her. Jonathan's gaze locked on her, steady and unshaken. His jaw clenched, but his eyes burned with something no tide of judgment could wash away: conviction. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the looming shadows of disapproval. He looked only at her. The waves roared louder, crashing against the shore as if echoing the tension around them. Each swell pounded like a drum, underscoring the unspoken promise forming between them. Selina's hand trembled, but Jonathan tightened his grip, firm, unyielding. In his silence she read more than words: an anchor, a vow, a refusal to let go. The noise of the crowd blurred. In that closeness, in that charged moment, the world shrank down to two hearts refusing to break. The sea raged, but their stillness defied it. One tear, one gaze, one choice that would change everything. Away from the heart of the crowd, Victoria moved with practiced grace, her smile sharp as glass. She leaned close to a pair of eager reporters, her voice a soft whisper designed to cut deep. "She doesn't love him," she murmured, eyes glinting with malice. "She loves his billions. That girl is nothing but a gold digger who clawed her way into his arms." The words spread like sparks in dry grass. One phone recorded, another texted, and soon the whispers grew into a current racing down the shoreline. Faces turned, not with curiosity, but with suspicion sharpened into judgment. Screens lit up. A headline formed before the night was over: "Billionaire's Scandal, Love or Greed?" Back at the center of the storm, Selina felt the shift before she heard it. The pointed stares, the hushed tones that pierced deeper than any shout. Jonathan caught the change too, his jaw tightening as the crowd's energy tilted, heavy with doubt. Victoria lingered in the background, her smirk widening. She hadn't just joined the fight, she had lit the fuse. And the fire was spreading fast. The glow of Selina's phone screen painted her face in cold light. Headlines screamed at her, cruel and unforgiving: "Black Woman Hunts Billionaire." Her breath caught in her throat. Each word felt like a blade, slicing through the fragile hope she had begun to rebuild. She dropped the phone onto the sand, burying her face in her hands as sobs shook her shoulders. The sound of her pain was quieter than the waves, but to Jonathan it was deafening. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her trembling frame, his chest pressed firm against her back, his voice low, steady, desperate. "Don't let their lies define you," he whispered against her hair. "Don't believe what they write, believe what you feel. Believe me." Selina's tears soaked into his hands as he held her tighter, refusing to let her slip away to the poison of the crowd. The world painted her as a villain, but in his embrace she was nothing less than his truth. And in that moment, his vow was simple: the louder their hate, the stronger his love would stand. Jonathan stepped forward, the soft hum of the ocean behind him, the sting of whispers still circling in the air. A small group had gathered, curious eyes fixed on him, waiting to see if the headlines were true. He drew in a breath, his voice cutting through the night without a microphone, raw and unpolished. "I need you all to hear this. I love her, not for money, not for ambition, not for anything she can give me. I love her because she is herself." The words hung in the salty breeze, carried farther than he intended. His gaze found Selina standing just behind him, her chest rising and falling fast. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to believe. Yet a few heads nodded, their faces softening, as if something inside them recognized the weight of truth. Jonathan's hands shook, but his voice didn't waver. "If that costs me everything else, so be it. Because without her, all of this means nothing." For the first time, silence worked in his favor, an acknowledgement that love, raw and imperfect, had spoken louder than wealth ever could. Selina sat on the sand with her little sister, the waves curling close to their toes. The night air carried a hush, as if the ocean itself leaned in to listen. Her cheeks were still damp from tears, but her voice carried a new weight, steady and clear. She turned to her sister, taking her small hands in her own. "Listen to me. We deserve to be loved. We deserve to live free. I will not bow my head any more." Her sister's eyes widened, a spark lighting inside them, reflecting the moonlight scattered across the sea. She threw her arms around Selina's waist, burying her face into the comfort of her sister's embrace. "I knew it," she whispered, voice trembling with both relief and belief. Selina held her tightly, closing her eyes, letting the warmth of that embrace rebuild her strength. For every cruel word, for every sneer, this moment was a reminder. They had something stronger than hate. They had each other. As the tide crept higher, Selina felt the fear begin to fade, replaced by resolve. She was no longer just surviving. She was standing. The shoreline was no longer silent. A murmur rose among the crowd, rippling through the air like the tide itself. At first, it was hesitant. A few soft voices of agreement. But then, louder, stronger, a young man's voice broke through. "We have the right to love. We have the right to be respected." Heads turned. Applause followed, timid at first, then swelling with courage. A woman with silver hair lifted her chin and shouted, "We've been silent too long. Tonight, we stand with her." More voices joined, echoing against the crash of the waves. The energy shifted, the mockery drowned out by a rising chorus. Selina blinked, stunned, her hand tightening around her sister's. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. Jonathan's gaze flicked across the crowd, taking in the faces, young and old, men and women, united by a single truth. This wasn't just about one love story. It was about dignity, about a people demanding to be seen. Selina's chest rose with a trembling breath. Their voices wrapped around her like armor. She was no longer just defending herself. She was carrying a movement. The sound of applause broke like a sudden storm. Hands clapped in rhythm, voices rose in cheers, and the tide of support washed over the beach. It wasn't scattered anymore. It was a wave, unified and strong. Selina's eyes darted from face to face. Strangers who had once watched in silence now stood for her. Some smiled with pride, others shouted her name, and a few simply nodded, their expressions saying more than words ever could. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something she had long craved. Belonging. Beside her, Jonathan's hand gripped hers firmly. He leaned close, voice steady, but full of awe. "You see it now, don't you? We're not alone." Tears blurred her vision as she looked around again. For years, every step felt like walking against the wind. Tonight, the wind had shifted. She was no longer just one woman resisting the tide. She was part of it, carried by its strength. Selina exhaled, her lips trembling into a faint smile. For the first time, hope felt louder than doubt. The cheers grew louder, drowning out the whispers that once cut Selina down. In the middle of it all, Victoria's face twisted with rage. Her heels dug into the sand as she spun away, each step sharper than the last, the fabric of her dress whipping behind her like a flag of defeat. Monica lingered longer. She searched the crowd for familiar faces, for allies who once laughed at her side, but one by one, they turned from her. Conversation stopped when she passed. Eyes narrowed with quiet judgment. The smirk she had worn so confidently only hours ago faltered into a twitch of bitterness. The camera lingered on her expression, the tightening jaw, the glassy eyes, the bitterness rising like smoke from a dying flame. She tried to hold her ground, but the silence around her was heavier than any insult. From the edge of the gathering, Jonathan and Selina didn't look back. Their hands remained joined, their focus on the sea ahead. Behind them, the two women who had tried to pull them apart stood swallowed by shadow. For now, their power was gone, their defeat etched into the night air. But in their eyes, revenge still flickered. The sea stretched wide before them, dark waves catching slivers of moonlight. Selina stood quiet for a moment, her hair shifting in the breeze, her chest rising with the weight of words she had long carried. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "Jonathan, if there's ever a chance, I want to speak, not just for me, for everyone who has ever been looked down on, for those who were told their worth was less because of the skin they were born in." Jonathan turned to her, studying the strength beneath her trembling tone. His hand tightened around hers. "Then we'll make it happen. Whatever stage you need, whatever voice tries to silence you, we'll stand against it." Selina's eyes glistened, not with sorrow this time, but with a fragile spark of hope. She looked back at the horizon, where the sea met the sky, and imagined a world where her words could echo further than the tide. The moment hung heavy, not as an end, but as a beginning, a promise whispered into the night air, waiting for its day to arrive. Torches lined the shoreline, their flames bending in the evening wind. A small stage had been built from wooden planks, its edges glowing beneath the flicker of firelight. People gathered in clusters, their faces a mix of curiosity, doubt, and quiet anticipation. Children perched on shoulders, elders leaned on canes. Young voices buzzed in murmurs that rose and fell like the tide. The sea whispered behind them, a constant reminder of both fragility and power. Selina stood near the edge of the stage, her hands pressed together, heart thudding against her ribs. She felt the weight of every stare, the pull of every expectation. This wasn't just a gathering, it was a test of courage, of truth, of how far she was willing to go for more than just herself. Jonathan stayed close, his presence steady, a silent anchor at her side. The torches crackled louder, their smoke spiraling into the night sky as if announcing that something was about to begin. The crowd fell into a hush. A single question hung in the air, unspoken but felt. Would she rise and speak, or remain silent in the shadows? Selina stepped forward, the torchlight catching the curve of her face. The wind lifted her hair, carrying strands across her cheek as she gripped the microphone with trembling hands. For a breath, the silence felt endless. Then her voice broke through, low but steady. "Money can buy power. It can buy a stage, a name, even the illusion of love," she said, pausing as her gaze swept across the sea of faces. "But it cannot buy a real heart. It cannot buy the right to live, to love, to be free." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like a current. Selina's eyes glistened, but she did not falter. "For too long, people like me have been told to stay silent, to stay small, to be grateful for crumbs. But no more. We deserve joy, we deserve dignity, and we deserve to walk into the light without shame." Her words rose with the tide, carried by the rhythm of waves striking the shore. Jonathan's hand tightened at his side, pride burning in his chest. Selina took a breath, her voice firmer now. "This is not just about me, it's about every person here who has been told they don't belong. Tonight, we claim what has always been ours." The crowd erupted, torn between gasps and cheers as her voice lingered in the night air. For a moment, nothing moved. The crowd stood frozen, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The crackle of the torches was the only sound, faint against the roar of waves. Selina's chest rose and fell as she drew in a deep breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She gripped the microphone tighter, unsure if she had said too much or not enough. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. She blinked, her vision blurred, but her chin remained lifted. In that fragile pause, she felt naked before them, her heart exposed. Then, from somewhere in the back, hands came together. A single clap, sharp and certain. Another followed, then another, until the quiet shattered. Applause rushed forward like a tide breaking free, joined by cheers and voices calling her name. Selina's lips trembled into a smile. The sound wrapped around her, not just noise, but affirmation. Proof that her truth had landed, that her voice mattered. Jonathan's eyes never left her. In the storm of applause he saw only her, standing tall, no longer bowed by shame. The crowd's roar grew louder, the kind that carried more than approval. It carried hope. Selina closed her eyes, letting the sound sink deep into her bones. Tonight, she wasn't alone. The applause still echoed when Jonathan stepped forward, his figure cutting through the torchlight. He reached for Selina's hand, his grip firm, unshaken. The crowd hushed again, drawn to the moment as if sensing something irreversible was about to be spoken. His voice carried over the sea breeze, steady but burning with conviction. "I choose her. Not money, not status, not the empire I was born into. I choose love." The words hung in the air, sharp as a strike of lightning, undeniable. Some gasped, others whispered, but the silence that followed was filled with weight. Selina's lips parted in disbelief, her breath catching. A smile broke through as tears traced down her cheeks, glistening in the torchlight. She clutched his hand tighter, as if anchoring herself to this impossible truth finally set free. For years, shadows had pressed in on them, doubt, judgment, betrayal. Yet now, with just a few words, Jonathan pushed them all aside. He wasn't hiding anymore. The crowd shifted, some shaking their heads, others breaking into applause once more. But for Selina, only one thing mattered. In his hand, in his eyes, she felt something stronger than the ocean's pull. For the first time, their love stood unashamed, unbroken, undeniable. They stood side by side, the waves brushing against the shore under the silver glow of the moon. The world around them felt hushed, as if the sea itself was listening. Jonathan's hand held Selina's, steady and certain, while her eyes shimmered with tears that no longer came from sorrow, but from release. The night air carried their silence, a silence heavier than words, yet lighter than fear. For the first time, they were no longer hiding, no longer bending to judgment or chains of wealth. Love was no longer a secret, but a truth that lived in every heartbeat between them. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a mirror of all the choices that had brought them here. Selina tilted her head slightly, a faint smile breaking through as though she had finally claimed her place in the world. Jonathan's gaze followed hers, unshaken, unashamed. And then came the lingering question, one that seemed to rise not only from their story, but from the sea itself, echoing toward every soul watching. What would you choose? Money, fame, or the right to live and to love without fear? The waves answered with their timeless rhythm, but the decision lingered in the hearts of those who listened.